across there. Where the purple star is, if you want to make a note there, it's about 2 o'clock from Jericho. You know what I mean by 2 o'clock? 12 would be straight up. Just a little of an angle, a 45-degree angle, but not past the Jordan River, on the west side of the Jordan River. So about where that purple star is, that would be their camp as they get ready to battle first Jericho and then Ai. And Ai was first known as Bethel. Jacob had his dream there. And then over the 400 years they were in Egypt, it changes to the name Ai. At least most scholars believe Ai and Bethel are in the same location. Okay so far? Just going to talk here for a little bit. And these battles are Joshua 5 through chapter 9. And they were told to destroy this whole area. And you might say, why if God loves life so much, why did he have them kill all the men and the women and the children? It just seems so gory, if not everything else. He was bringing a people he had chose to be holy into a very pagan area. And what God is really teaching us tonight isn't to kill people, but how dangerous sin is and how easy it is for it to consume us. And so he wanted it destroyed. If you would, it's hard to know where to bring this in, but let's just go ahead and turn to Deuteronomy chapter 7. This would be before they cross, but I want you to see how Moses was teaching them and talking a little bit about this difficult time of having to do battle in the midst of receiving the promise of God. So Deuteronomy chapter 7, I'll read a few verses, and then I'll have somebody else read a few verses, and we'll just take it a little chunk at a time. And we're just going to read the first 9 verses, okay? Deuteronomy 7, I'll begin. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations, notice all of these, larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, you must destroy them totally. Now at this point, what we need to focus on is he wanted the paganism, the evil destroyed. It's not as much the people. I know it is the people. I'm not trying to discredit that, but what is the meaning of this destruction is it was the evil. When you've defeated them, you must destroy them. Make no treaty with them. Show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. See, this is where it's all about the relationship and the evil. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you, and will quickly destroy you. That's what God was trying to do. He was trying to protect them. All right, let's have somebody read verse 5 and 6, nice and loud. This is Deuteronomy 7, 5 and 6.
But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples of the face of the earth.
All right. You're a holy people, and I'm trying to keep you that way, so that's why I don't want you to intermarry. And even their focuses of worship have to be destroyed. Their focuses of worship, the altars, the idols, the pillars, all had to be destroyed. Okay, verse 7 and 8.
The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh king of Egypt.
All right. Notice why you love us because we're so smart. No, you love us because we're so big. No, I just love you. And he leaves it at that. You know, you're smaller, you're fewer, but I still love you, and I promise this to the ancestors. Now notice, if he made a promise to the ancestors, he's still keeping it, even though the ancestors aren't on the earth anymore. He's keeping the promise. So let me just read verse 9. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is a faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. Now, I want you to turn to one other part of that chapter, verse 22 and 23. We'll jump ahead a little bit. So God, we're just going to walk across here into the promised land, and you're going to wipe everybody out, right? In a day, in a month, in a week. One of the things we like about a promise is if God could just wave a magic wand and say, twang, it's all yours. It's not how it happens. Verse 22 and 23, somebody read it nice and loud.
The Lord your God will drive out those nations before you, little by little. You will not be allowed to eliminate them all at once, or the wild animals will multiply around you. But the Lord your God will deliver them over to you, throwing them into great confusion until they are destroyed.
All right, there's the promise. Sometimes promises, come little by little. And so now that we see that, let me just highlight again. One of the things is, you may have never asked yourself this question, but once Jericho's done, how do you conquer this much land? They went central, they went south, and then they went north, okay, after they crossed the Jordan. And so they set up camp at Gilgal, and they take Jericho. Do you remember what happens at Jericho? One guy holds on to some of the goods. He doesn't say no to himself. He holds on to it, and at first they lose to Ai, and so they get beaten back. And then they realize what happened. They take care of the sin in the camp, and they defeat Ai. Well, now, when you look down here at the red dot, it's Gibeon. There is no dot for Gibeon here because remember, all the black dots are the kings they defeated. And one of the scriptures we just read, make no treaty with them. The Gibeonites come from a far way away. They wear old beat-up clothes. They bring moldy bread, and they bring old cracked wineskins, and they fool them. And so that red dot, where all the roads come together, was Gibeon, that close to Ai, and yet that far from Gilgal, where their camp is, and they fool them. But they were that close. Now, there's one other interesting thing. As they traveled, you may remember when they were in Kadesh Barnea, the spies, the 12 spies, they came right up through here, but that was another generation. And they didn't keep a lot of records, so they didn't record that after you go through Jerusalem, you'll go through Gibeon. They didn't. So when the Gibeonites showed up and said, we're from a long way away, they lost it. Just one generation didn't pass it on to the next generation. So they become slaves, and once it's found out. But then the 5 kings down here go, we're in trouble if Gibeon mixes with these Israelites. So they attack, and by Joshua chapter 10, that's when the sun stands still. And you remember the 5 kings came, and their armies are getting defeated, so they all run away, and the 5 kings stay in one cave. So they put a seal over it. They wait till the battle's done, and remember the sun stands still for a day, or real close to a full day. And Joshua has the men come out and has all the soldiers put their foot on one of the king's necks. And then the next guy comes by, and he puts his foot, and he says, remember, God has given us this victory. Just a huge story. You got to look at that. That's Joshua chapter 10. But here's what people forget. Jump forward all the way to Jesus' day, or even just to David's day, and the capital city becomes Jerusalem. When the sun stood still, when the kings were in a cave, when their foot was put on the king's neck, one of those kings was Jerusalem. God doesn't just defeat an enemy for us today. He defeats an enemy for us tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. It isn't just where we're at right now. God sees kind of tubularly through all time, and he was preparing Jerusalem for them when they were just in the middle of a battle. But it was all happening with a purpose and a reason. And so I just want you to see that's pretty key. Hebron was down here. That's where David will start for the first 7 years of his kingdom. It's also one of the first altars Abraham ever built. And so Hebron was a key city in the old days of the patriarchs. And so that's the southern campaign, and they come down this way. Then they turn and they go Joshua chapter 11, and they do the northern part all the way up to Hazor. Now, the sad part is Hazor is just a dot on a page. And if we were going to get real technical and I would show you video, Hazor was the strongest of all the enemies up here, but they were up on a high hill, and they could see literally for miles, almost all the way to the Sea of Galilee. And so when Israel was coming, remember, God said, I'm going to put a terror in them. They're going to be confused and frustrated by you. They got to watch Israel coming for a long time. Oh, man, they're coming. Oh, they're going to kill us. Oh, they're stronger than we are. Even the geography works for God's purpose. Isn't that cool? And so I just share that with you. Then there was land still to take. That's chapter 13. Again, if you want to make a note, chapter 12 is the list of all these cities and how they conquered all those cities. But one of the things they did not take are the 5 Philistine cities. And I want to show you those. They're not on the front map because they weren't conquered. So they're not even listed, as if they don't even exist. But go ahead for a second and go ahead and turn your outline over. And not all of them are listed, but if you want to circle them, Ashkelon you can see, Gaza you can see, and Ekron. This is the Philistine area. There's 2 they didn't list on this map. Ashdod is just a little above Ashkelon, about across from Gezer. And then Gath is, there's a road here out of Ashkelon over to Gath, and that's Goliath's hometown. Those 5 cities, they did not conquer. Now, can I tell you something? That was a long, long time ago. We're now in 2021. This area is called the Gaza Strip, the Hamas. They are still fighting the same people they were fighting in David and Samson's day, Samson before David. This land was never conquered. Now, is that because God wasn't strong enough? No. They didn't finish the battles, and I think God sometimes always leaves us a challenge. Why would God leave us a challenge? He was giving us the promised land. Would we depend on him if there were never any enemies? If there were never any struggles? And so I don't want to answer everything for you there, but now I want to just take time to highlight 7 things that are required from us to receive God's promises. So turn over to the front page for the first 2. Receiving God's promises, just some devotional thoughts tonight. First one is there's difficult battles. One of the things we accidentally do in our humanness is feel God is supposed to give us promises so we don't have to have battles. But difficult battles are part of the process of seeing God answer the promise. And then that's also tied into defeating the enemy. Part of when we receive a promise, it isn't God just comfort me. Would you just defeat Satan? Would you just show Satan he lost again? Let's just not pray for a promise. God, take away my headache, take away my problem, defeat Satan. Because difficult battles, defeating the enemy. Let's turn it over. Remember Achan and hiding his gold and his fancy robe from Jericho. One thing we have to do to really receive the promise is denying self. We have to say no to ourselves and yes to God. So that's devotional point number 3. The next thing is, as they battled again and again, all of these people were pagan. They did not believe in Jehovah Yahweh. We need to recognize the danger of sin. Even while we're waiting for a promise, we have to realize sin is dangerous. Sin is costly. There are people who died because of Achan's problem. Then the next one is we need to declare the greatness of God. The glory of God went ahead of them in such a beautiful way. You remember when they did have the sun stand still? More people died of hailstones than of the sword. If you read Joshua chapter 10, more people died from God wiping them out than from them. Because we need to show them the glory of God, the greatness of God. The next one, just another simple reminder, it's a daily effort. We don't try real hard on Sunday and then God takes care of us Monday to Saturday. It's a daily effort as we wait to receive God's promises. And the last one is dependence on God. The reason he gives us a struggle is so we don't think it's in our power, but it's in his power. But now I want to give you another reference. And if you'll look this one up, Joshua chapter 23. Okay? And I want you to look up verse 14. And we're almost to the end. Joshua's only 24 chapters. Gave you most of it as up through all the battles are by chapter 11. Chapter 12 is the list of all the battles. Chapter 13 and beyond, then some other stuff there. But now let's jump to chapter 23, verse 14. Somebody read it for us nice and loud.
Now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed.
Okay, Moses is getting ready to die, but he says, I just want you to know. Or no, this is Joshua's about ready to die. Sorry, not Moses. But he says, just remember, not one of God's promises didn't get completed. And so there we see that even there's a purpose maybe for the Gaza Strip and the Philistines still to be there. There would have been no need for Samson, no need for David and Goliath if the Philistines would have been wiped out. But I want us to take a minute of these 7 reasons that are required of us to receive God's promises, difficult battles. I want you to pick which one stands out to you. Whether you explain it or not, that's okay. But just what hits you, that to receive God's promises, there will be difficult battles. We'll have to defeat the enemy, denying self, recognizing the dangers of sin, declaring the greatness of God, daily effort, or dependence on God. Any one of those jump out at you? Daily effort, yeah. That's one thing we wish promises took care of. I don't want to have to work at it every day. But that's why we depend on him. Another one. Yep. Yep. Go ahead.
We're trained to look at what I've done, look at the successes I've had in life, look how I've done this, I've built
Mm-hmm.
this. And that dependence upon God reminds us that it's not through our own power, it's 100% through his power. He's the one that blesses us, gives us the ability to do what we do, and that future we build is through him, not through us.
Good stuff.
Declare the greatness of God.
There's power there. You know, I think for the person who thinks of themselves as a Christian but doesn't really put forth much effort, they're waiting on the promises of God, but they haven't denied self. They haven't put their self on the cross. And I think that's part of it too, but speaks to me. Just we always have to do that. All right. Anything else on the highlight of the 7 points? If not, on this second map, and those of you that are watching online, there are little white squares all over this map. Over the next 400 years, just the same amount of time they were in Egypt, will be the period of the judges. But they had no king, so they needed no capital city. Where was the king for Saul, and then especially for David, he sets it up in Jerusalem, and then Solomon stays in Jerusalem. So then everything had to be right in here. But the beauty of God's plan was he liked the judges because he used people from all over, and he let the focus from time to time be in a different area. Two judges you may not know a lot about, but they're kind of fun judges, is Othniel and Shamgar. You'll have to look them up and read in the book of Judges. But they're on the very opposite ends of Israel. Didn't always go to the same area. Then Ehud. Ehud was the left-handed judge. If you need a good, gross story for a fourth grade boy, be sure to look up Ehud, the left-handed judge. Yeah, he stabs the king so hard that his hand goes into the flubber, and he has to pull his hand out. So cool. I'm not trying to be gory. I'm trying to be a fourth grade boy. Just letting it out. All right. There's Gideon. You may remember Gideon, mighty warrior. And Deborah. Samson. Where was Samson? He was drawn to the Philistines, and he's living right next door. Jephthah. That's an interesting story. And so, but I just want you to see that God used everybody. God used all the tribes. He used all the land. He didn't just pick one area, and everything had to happen there. And so you'll notice that on your outline, that they weren't just from one area, but God used people all over. So next week, we're going to look at Live Like a Wise King, and we'll look at the kingdom of Saul and how it then grew for David and how it was at its biggest under Solomon, and they were at peace. David was the warrior, but by Solomon, Israel was at peace, the land of Israel. And we're going to look at that next week. Any questions as we conclude Bible study for tonight? Anything? I hope you enjoy studying. I think maps, I know they seem a little dry and a little flat, no pun intended. Well, maybe a pun was a little intended. But it really makes the scriptures come alive.